Welcome to episode 16 of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we've got some breaking news to discuss. I mentioned in the last episode that I would be recording an episode as soon as we got some information back regarding our two people that were testing the NBA waters. And I record this the night of Wednesday, May 29th. And I can officially say that Mark Sears and Jarin Stevenson will both withdraw their name from the NBA draft and are going to be returning to school to compete for next season. We had heard, we'll start with Mark and discuss him. You know, what can you say about Mark? He was already going to go down as one of the best players in Alabama basketball history. He played a big role last 2 seasons ago on that Sweet 16 team. And then last season, he 21.5 points a game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal and a half, over 50% shooting, over 43% from three. Just an elite all-around performance on the season from efficiency, from scoring. You know, in big games when we needed him, he was there. He was absolutely incredible, completely throughout the entire season. And it's also big to have a guy from the state of Alabama on the team. I talked a little bit about having guys from Alabama, and it's going to be big this season because now you're actually going to have 3 guys from Alabama if you include Youngblood, having been born in Tuscaloosa, Philon being from Mobile, and Jarin from Muscle Shoals. Having guys from the state of Alabama is big because the rivalries mean a little more to them. Playing for the in-state team that they grew up supporting means a little more to them. And you saw that with Mark Sears, right? You saw that when he transferred from Ohio. He had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because he had to play lower level basketball in order to be able to transfer up to a school like Alabama. And now Nate is able to convince him to come back for one final season and use his final year of eligibility to compete for a national title. And it's just absolutely huge. I would say a big reason in this, and Mark has been honest with this, is NIL, right? When you look at the way the NIL landscape has shaped basketball, prior, in order for a kid to be able to make any money, they would have to go to the NBA, right? There just wasn't the money to be made in college basketball. And so when you look at it the way it is today, if he was going to get a shot at a guaranteed contract, right? So a guaranteed NBA contract, you're talking about like a first-round pick, then absolutely he needs to go ahead and go to the NBA draft, right? I think everyone would agree. You've seen Nate say it time and time again. If our guys are going to go first round, I'm not going to encourage them to stay, right? You saw that last year with Clowney, obviously Brandon Miller. Guys that are going to be a first-round pick, he wants them to go. He wants them to go ahead and if their dream is to be in the NBA, then let's go be there, right? Mark Sears, however, has a couple of things working against him. First off, he's just over 5'10 and a half, right? So that's working against him. Additionally, he is older. He's now going to be a fifth-year senior, so he's 23, 24. You're just talking it is an uphill battle for those types of players. And so that's something where typically when you're looking at a player like that, even one as productive as Mark Sears, and I will say the height probably is working against him the most of anything, it is a standpoint where Mark Sears is probably looking at a two-way deal, right? A G League / NBA two-way deal. Those types of deals are paying in the $500,000 range. I'm not going to say the number that I have heard floated for Mark Sears, but just know that it's more than $500,000. And I think that is a surprise to no one if you followed any of the NIL market, right? So there's a standpoint where he can make more money at the University of Alabama than he could on these types of two-way deals. It's also a standpoint of when you look at the rest of the roster, right? And we talked about it last episode. Again, you're looking at a roster where, however you want to shake it, there's a possibility that your 3 worst guys are Naz Cunningham, Philon, and Mo Diabate. So Diabate that played big roles last year, Cunningham that's a former number 1 overall recruit, and Philon that's a top 40 recruit, previous Kansas commit, Mr. Basketball in the state of Alabama, like, and a very elite scorer, over 35 a game when he was in Mobile. So, like, that's the type of roster at the bottom of your roster you're talking about. Alabama goes 13 deep this season. Now, they're not going to play 13 deep. Nate's going to have to figure out how the roster is going to shake out with minutes. But some minutes that we know are going to be happening is Mark is going to get his minutes, clearly. However, a guy like Philon and guys like Aiden Holloway are going to allow Mark to not have to play the 40 minutes a game, even if you have an injury to a guy like Latrell Wrightsell, like you had last season. I think that was something that really hurt us down the stretch last season. Obviously, him getting healthy, and we learned how to play without him for part of the NCAA tournament, and we're able to win some games without him. But no matter what, Mark Sears coming back is huge for Alabama. Even without Jarin Stevenson, I think Mark Sears being back would probably solidify Alabama as being a, potentially number one preseason team in the country. Again, it's going to be Alabama or Kansas, depending upon who you ask and, who the preferences are. Alabama or Kansas are going to be your number one teams going into next season. And Mark Sears is a huge piece of that. It's a great thing that we're going to have him back. It just adds to an already impressive roster. And I will say that the combination of transfers, freshmen, and returning guys, especially with Mark Sears, this is going to be Nate Oates' most talented roster he's had in Tuscaloosa. This will be more talented on paper than the Brandon Miller year, more talented than last season when you made your first Final Four. And the sky is really the limit for this team. Obviously, you're going to have to talk about chemistry. You're going to have to talk about how they play well together, defense, offense, all the things. However, on paper, this is Nate Oates' best team, and it starts at the top with Mark Sears. You're returning a guy that's a first-team All-American. You're returning a guy that's going to be very hotly talked about in the National Player of the Year conversation. There's some debate that he could have even won it last season if it wasn't for a guy like Zach Edey, right? Mark Sears is that polarizing and that incredible of a player that he is going to garner that level of attention, and he deserves it, right? He deserves every bit of the attention that he's going to get coming into a season when he's also, not that he had to shoulder all of the scoring load this season, but he definitely shouldered more of the scoring load this season than he did last season. And I think that with the guys that we are bringing in, he's not going to have to shoulder quite as much of it this season, right? I think you've got some guys coming in that are more than capable scorers. You're returning a guy like Grant Nelson. He's able to play his traditional four. I think that you're going to have a little bit more scoring around him even this season. So I think the sky is absolutely the limit for Mark Sears and the potential that he sees coming into this season. Then we move to Jarin Stevenson. And Jarin Stevenson was actually one that we were a little bit, for people that were in the know, were a little bit more concerned about Jarin than they even were Mark, right? When you started to hear Mark and Oates, some things mentioned about Mark, it was, hey, if he doesn't get a guaranteed contract, he's probably back. And when you know the way the NBA works, it kind of seemed obvious to a lot of people, no fault to Mark, but that he was probably going to be getting a two-way. And so it felt like Mark coming back was a real possibility. However, with Jarin, you started to hear, and it's similar to what you heard with Noah Clowney. Clowney obviously started the whole season, and so it was a little bit different circumstances. He was a little bit better rebounder and defender. So obviously not apples to apples. But at the end of the day, Jarin Stevenson was a reclassification. So Jarin Stevenson is 19 years old. When somebody like that is looking at the NBA, just due to the way that the NBA is, they're often going to look at a prospect that's much younger as somebody that they can mold, as somebody that has untapped potential. When you look at the body type and the archetype of Jarin Stevenson, he's 6'9", 6'10". He's really a stretch four. He only shot just under 32% last season, so didn't have the best shooting year, but you can clearly see the offense and the shot is there. So it's a standpoint of Jarin Stevenson, was somebody that you knew the NBA teams would absolutely, be taking a look at. You just weren't sure if he had done quite enough to be a first round pick like a Clowney, or if he was going to fall to second round. The thought was probably second round, and then the question is, is Jarin going to return similar to Mark? You had heard a little bit less from Jarin. All the information when he first entered was he's absolutely back. He's just getting information. He's absolutely back. Then you started hearing a few rumors. Some teams were really interested. The age was playing a big part. The athleticism was playing a big part. So there was a little bit of a cause for concern. But, he held firm. At the end of the day, Jarin was looking to know what he needed to get better at to be able to be a draftable prospect in the coming seasons. And I think an extra season under Nate Oates' wing will be absolutely great for him. Similar to Grant Nelson, having guys like Aiden Sherrill and Cliff Amore is going to absolutely help Jarin, because there were moments, and also just playing a full season is going to help Jarin. When you look at Jarin early season last season, like a Clemson game, he was getting bullied off the block. Teams knew that, hey, we got this guy that was a reclass from high school. He's not physical enough. And an Ian Shefflin from Clemson just put his shoulder down and just went right through him. Then you saw what happened in the Clemson game in the Elite Eight. Jarin has one of his best games in Crimson, probably his best game in Crimson the whole time, right? So it's a standpoint of Jarin grew so much last season. And I think that the physicality, the size, the body, having other guys to be able to work with and work off of, namely, like I said, Grant, Cliff, Aiden, all these guys, I think will make Jarin better. So you have a front court that you've got to be really, really happy about, because you've got 2 true 4s and you've got 2 true 5s. And it's just absolutely great when you have that, because the versatility of those guys will be absolutely massive. So really quick, I want to talk about what my thoughts are for a lineup for next season. I saw a tweet put out by John Rothstein, and I know a bunch of Bama fans were disagreeing with the tweet, and I also disagree with the tweet, but just want to give a quick, this is my thoughts on what I think the lineup will look like for next season. So I'm looking at a starting lineup of Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell. To start the season, I think it will be Chris Youngblood, and then Grant Nelson and Cliff Amore. I think that 3 spot is the spot that I am most curious about. I don't think that Darian Reed secures the 3 to start the season, like a game 1 starter. However, I do think that by the time we get into later season SEC play, I would be shocked if Darian Reed is not the starter. I think that his potential and his athleticism and just what he brings to the table is going to be too much to be able to hold off of the starting lineup. So personally, I do think that Darian Reed cracks the starting lineup. I think that it will take a little bit for him to get into the starting lineup, and that will be intentional. I thought I was going to talk about the non-conference games, but I'm actually going to hold off on that. I'm going to talk about the conference games today. But I do think that with the tough non-conference that we have, it doesn't make as much sense to have Darian thrown into the fire quite that early as the starter. Similar to what we just talked about with Jarin Stevenson, right? It takes a little time for these guys to adjust from high school to college. And I think that, you have the guys with the experience where you don't have to throw Darian Reed into the fire. I think versus like a Brandon Miller, you didn't have the transfer guys and the guys around him to be able to, afford to have Brandon Miller come off the bench. I think with the roster this season, you can afford to have Darian Reed come off the bench for a while. So I don't think that Darian starts day 1. For a second line, obviously, I'm looking at Aiden, Houston, Darian Reed, Jarin, and then Aiden Sherrill. And then, as we've mentioned, the last 3 of Mo, Nas, and LeBaron Fallon. I, have talked about what I think some of the minutes will look like for some of these guys. That's just my guesses. Personally, the one that that John Rothstein mentioned in the starting lineup, and Auburn fans like to talk about, like, oh, you didn't get Aiden Holloway to transfer to come off the bench. I fully disagree with that statement. Personally, I look at Aiden Holloway as being what Javon Quinterly was for Alabama, somebody that comes off the bench but plays starter-level minutes. We look at Alabama last season. Latrell Wrightsell played 23 minutes a game. And for a decent percentage of the season, he did not start. He started a little bit, but for a decent percentage of the season, he did not start. I think something like that is what we're looking at for a Aiden Holloway. If I look back at Alabama in 21-22, Javon Quinterly played 30 minutes a game and came off the bench. That was 21-22. Let me go back one more year. But either way, at the end of the day, it's a standpoint where Javon Quinterly played the role that I'm talking about, where you come off the bench, but you are the guy that's going to run the point a decent bit. And I think that is what they pitched Aiden Holloway on. You can run point, you can help run the offense, but you're going to start coming off the bench. But as, Oates has mentioned quite a few times, it doesn't matter who starts. It matters who's in the game, right? At the end of the day, it all matters, like, how many minutes do you get? Who's in the game when it matters, right? Like, who starts is all about matchups, truly, right? And so I truly do think that Aiden Holloway was pitched a role of coming off the bench. So that would be my expectation for him, that he would be coming off the bench for next year's team. So for all the Auburn fans that want to be like, oh, you didn't pitch him to transfer to Alabama just to come off the bench, I disagree. I look at Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell, Chris Youngblood, and like I said, eventually transitioning over to Darian Reed, and then Grant Nelson and Cliff Amore. Obviously, injuries would change that up, but with a fully healthy lineup, that's who I think is in your starting lineup. Hoping for full health throughout the season. So the last thing I want to talk about, this is going to be a fairly short episode today. Just wanted to get out some information and be able to talk about Jarin Stevenson, talk about Mark Sears, since them announcing that they're back, I thought was absolutely massive and was worth a quick episode. But the last thing I want to mention, and I'll pop it up here on the screen, is our SEC opponents for next season was fully released. And that includes Oklahoma and Texas having been added to the slate. So the way that it worked out this season is there are 6 teams that you're going to play just at home, 6 teams that you're going to play just on the road, and then 3 teams that you're getting home and on the road. So the 3 teams that Alabama is getting home and away splits with are Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. Obviously, Auburn, that's one that you're going to have circled, trying to get your revenge from the loss last season. You were able to win in Coleman, but anytime you lose against Auburn, it's something that you're trying to get back at. And I think that this roster is built to be able to win in Neville. This roster is built to be able to win in Coleman. So I think that this is a really, really good matchup for Alabama. Obviously, it's going to be tough on the road, but I think that Alabama's roster is absolutely more than capable. Then Kentucky, this is not the Kentucky of old, right? This is year 1 under Mark Pope. So it's going to be a completely different look Kentucky team from the level of the offense they're going to running, the players that are going to be on the court. It's going to be completely different guys than what you're used to seeing at Kentucky, and who you saw last season. It's going to be a completely different roster. So I do think this isn't the worst year to have Kentucky home and away. Obviously I think that Mark Pope is going to bring an energy to Kentucky, but ceases to be seen how he actually performs on the court. So not the worst. And then Mississippi State, don't hate it. Chris Jans is a really good coach. If you've never been to the Hump in Starkville, me and my girlfriend went last season. It's a really, really fun atmosphere, really fun place to play, tough place to play. Even as good as this team was this last season, Alabama was able to, squeak out of there with a win. But, not a super easy place to play. I thought that Mississippi State's done a pretty good job in the portal, done a pretty good job overall. So, I think that the home and away splits of those three, you got some good teams. You got some what will be quality wins, home and away. Not terrible. I think that your away slate is a decent bit more difficult than your home slate, which is not ideal, but it will lead to, having more than enough net wins. What I will say, like I said, we're not going to cover the non-conference slate today just because I'm waiting on a few more games to be officially announced with dates and confirmed. Like, for example, the St. John's game. There was rumors of a St. John's game happening at Madison Square Garden. That was only talked about last season. We're, at this point, unsure if it's even going to happen. A lot of us are leaning towards no at this point, but I'm trying to wait on a few more games to come out before I officially talk about the non-conference slate. So if you'll bear with me, as soon as I get some additional information and as soon as non-conference gets fully announced, I will do an episode talking through each team and what I really like and what I'm looking forward to, because there are some heavy hitters on that, including, the home and home we just signed with Purdue, Illinois is on there, Houston's going to be in there in the MTE, so we've got quite a few big games to look forward to this season. But we'll continue on with the away slate. So the away slate is Arkansas on the road. So Arkansas is Calipari, so it's Kentucky, but in Fayetteville. He is still building his roster. He has said he's only going to have 9 players. I'm kind of a little unsure of how that's going to work out with just having 9 roster slots. I know he's doing it from an NIL perspective. It concerns me a little bit if they have any type of injury issues. Overall, I'm just curious of the experiment that's happening in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So I think it's a very tough place to play. I think that Calipari is a pretty good coach, but, that's one that's intriguing to me. Missouri, we will see what happens. They were 0-18 this season, but were very good last season, or 2 seasons ago, I guess. I think that they have done a good job in the portal, have done a good job recruiting, but can Dennis Gates get the guys to perform on the court? That ceases to be the question, so we will see what happens this season. South Carolina, Lamont Paris has done a great job. Nick Pringle joins him. I think that South Carolina is a very underrated team, and I think that South Carolina on the road is going to be a very underrated game, one that Alabama will absolutely have to be up for. Tennessee on the road, it's been a while since we've won at Tennessee. A lot of it has to do with their physicality. A lot of it has to do with officials. A lot of it has to do with just overall how Alabama has prepared going into that game. Alabama did a decent job this past season, except for the big run that they gave up. So I think that this team has the guys and is built to be able to play more physical, play through contact. You have the experience, plus you have some transfers with experience that can play through contact, like a Chris Youngblood. So I think that Alabama will have the guys to win in Knoxville, but that's going to be a very, very tough place to win. You have not won there in a very long time. Texas, first time going to Austin. I think that Alabama in Austin will be a good game. I'm not sure too much of what to expect out of Rodney Terry's group this season. I think that they will probably be pretty good. I know that their NIL is strong there and it has helped him in recruiting, but I'm not too sure of what to expect out of them. So overall, I think that it will be a decent test, but I don't think Texas will be at the top of the SEC this season, top 2 or 3 type competing levels. And then A&M. Buzz Williams, A&M. A&M's a fairly tough place to play. Alabama has struggled a little bit with buzz historically, a little, but Alabama won big in their matchup this past season. They won big in the SEC tournament 2 years ago. So I think that Nate has figured out buzz. I think that Alabama can come out of Aggie land with the win. And then your home slate, like I said, I don't think that it's the greatest of home slates, but I do think that you have what will be some very good matchups. You have Florida with Todd Golden. They return quite a few guys, and Golden has done a really good job, last season. We had a really tough matchup with Florida, and Florida was a really, really good team. I expect them to be good again. You have Georgia. I don't think Georgia will be at the top of the SEC, but if nothing else, you have a chance to beat up on Asa Newell, since Asa chose to go to Georgia with Mike White over coming to Alabama. So Darian Reed against the team that he could have chosen. So I think that one will be a feisty home game. LSU, I'm very curious on what McMahon's going to have going with LSU this season. I think that they can't have the ability to be good, but they're another one that I don't know what I truly expect out of them this season. I think that they will be, middle to bottom of the SEC. I don't think they're going to be bad, but I don't think that they're going to compete at the top of the SEC. Ole Miss is one that really has me very is one that I would circle, right? Ole Miss is a team with Chris Beard. We thought Chris Beard was potentially in for some other jobs. Ole Miss locks him down, and Beard has a pretty good roster coming in. He had a decent roster last season and, had some issues. They gave Alabama actually a lot of troubles in that game. And I think that it's a game that Alabama does not need to overlook. I think it's a game that Chris Beard is going to have the team playing at a higher level than they were last season. And I think that he's got a few more of his guys that he would want to run his style of system. So I think that Ole Miss next season is one that you absolutely cannot overlook. Ole Miss will be a very good team under Chris Beard. So that's one that you absolutely don't need to overlook. Oklahoma with Porter Moser. Honestly, I don't think that Oklahoma will be competing. I think similar to LSU, I don't think they're going to be competing near the top of the SEC. I think that it will be a good game. Obviously, first time playing Oklahoma, with them being a member of the conference. I was actually in Norman 2 years ago when they beat us as the number one overall seed in the country. And Alabama played pretty poorly in that game. We were the better team, and they kind of shot lights out. I think that Nate will be looking for a kind of a get back after that beatdown that happened in Norman. The court got stormed. Me, Nate Burner, a few other people were there, and it was not an experience that I know that Nate enjoyed. And so the get back for Oklahoma, I do think, will be happening. And then finally, Vandy. Vandy's one that I'm super curious on what they're going to look like this season under the new coach. I think that overall, I think that Vandy is a little bit of a wild card team. I think that Vandy, it would not surprise me if they beat some teams they shouldn't, but I think that Alabama absolutely should be able to take care of Vandy. They're going to play another faster, more up-tempo style based on what we've seen out of their coach, similar to, Mark Pope at Kentucky moving to a faster, more up-tempo style. We've seen that out of Vandy's coach as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on what the SEC slate looks like. Like I said, I do think kind of the games that you need to circle for home are probably Ole Miss, Florida, and I think Georgia could have some fireworks just because of the recruiting battles that have happened between Alabama and Georgia over the last couple of years. On the away slate, I think that honestly most of them could show some storylines. Arkansas, obviously first year of Calipari. Missouri, just not sure what to expect. So, you never know. I think that one, maybe not. I think that Lamont Paris, did a great job this season at South Carolina. So, curious to see what he does next year. Rick Barnes, like I said, we haven't won in Knoxville in a while. Texas, we're looking at this is the first time us going to Austin and, seeing how Texas is. I think that's one just to kind of be on the lookout with. And then obviously you're home and aways with Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. I think that all of those, the away games are not going to be walk in the parks for any of those because, even if it is a worse state team, State's not an easy place to play. Even if it's a Kentucky team under a first-year head coach, you're still going to Rupp Arena, right? So I think that all of those games are ones that you just are going to have to circle, kind of keep an eye out on. So that is what I think about the SEC schedule for this season. As I said, I will be recording another episode later on when I get some information, and some information continues to come out regarding the non-conference schedule. And who all is officially on it. We do have some announced games, like with McNeese State coming to town for Will Wade's return. We have Illinois coming to Birmingham. We've got Purdue. We're going to be on the road. Creighton coming to Tuscaloosa. Like I said, Houston, we're going to be playing them in Vegas and the MTE. So there's quite a few games that have been announced. There's still some outstanding. So as soon as I get some information regarding that, I will be putting out an episode to discuss. And as I mentioned in the last episode as well, I am going on a trip here at the beginning of, or I guess middle of June, on the 13th. So I'm actually going to be working on writing some articles here in the coming week or next couple of weeks. And I'm going to be dropping those, talking about the freshmen, the transfers, as well as just kind of some outlooks. Also, whenever we get a coaching hire, I will also kind of do a little bit of a breakdown of them as well, similar to how I did last season. Thankfully, this season, you've only got one coach that you're replacing. So, won't have to do quite as level of a long-form write-up as I did last season. But just want to do some write-ups and make sure everybody is aware of who all is on the roster, who's going to be coaching next season, what their strengths are, and what to look forward to about this Alabama basketball team. And then, as I mentioned, as we get closer to the end of summer, we will transition over into some football content once we kind of know a little bit more of what is going on and, any injuries that happen and kind of what the beginning of fall camp looks like. So if y'all are interested in all the Alabama sports content, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I really appreciate all the support. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, please shoot them in the comments. I read all the comments. I'm happy to talk to anybody about whatever it is you're interested in. Shoot me a message here on Substack, on Twitter. All my information is linked. So if you are interested in getting in touch with me, just please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.